group is responsible for over 50 attacks on U.S. soil and has over 35 compounds right here in our very own nation. The spread of homegrown terrorists and what they mean for America.
To Islamic terrorism.
Islamic terrorists.
It's clear that the problem is Islam.
Islamic terrorists.
Radical Islam wants to kill you. On 9/11, when al-Qaeda terrorists flew airliners into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania, it was a surprise attack. Most Americans never saw it coming. More than 5 years later, we have no excuse. The message is loud and unmistakable. Islamic extremists have not gone away. They still want to harm us.
This group, so you understand, is more than just a terrorist group. They don't want to just attack people and buildings. They want to attack the very idea of human freedom. They want to attack your freedoms as a human being. They're against freedom and democracy completely.
Radical Islam is nothing more than communism or Nazism with the feds.
The topic of this evening's talk is terrorism a Muslim monopoly? First, let us understand what is the meaning of the word terrorism. It is very difficult to define the word terrorism. There are various different definitions, and many of them contradict. The definition is intangible. It keeps on changing depending upon the geographical location and the historical fact. It is very difficult to define terrorism. But according to the Oxford Dictionary, it says that terrorism is a use of violent action to get and fulfill a political aim or to force a government to act. This word terrorism was initially first time coined in 1790s during the French Revolution. And it was in 1790s that the statesman Edwin Burke, who was a British statesman, he used this word to describe the Jacobin-ruled French regime. And the years 1793 and 1794, it was called the Reign of Terror, the Years of Terror. And Maximilien Robespierre, he was heading this government, and during that time, he has killed thousands of people. He has guillotined thousands of innocent human beings. Historical records tell us that he had arrested more than 500,000 human beings, out of which 40,000 he has executed. More than 200,000 were deported, and more than 200,000, they were starved and tortured to death in the prisons. So this word terrorism initially was coined to describe the people during the French Revolution. Today, we have in the international media, there is a very common statement which is repeatedly bombarded, especially in the Western media. And that statement is, all Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. And this statement was even imported to India, especially after the 11th July, the serial train bomb blast that took place in Bombay, especially to Bombay. And we find that even in India, especially in Bombay, people kept on repeating the statement that all Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. Let us analyze today what do the historical records tell us, and what does the data on terrorist attack that is available in world history, what do they tell us? When we look at the records, in 19th century, we can hardly find any terrorist attacks have been done by Muslims. Time does not permit me to speak about the details of the attacks taking place in the 19th century. I'll just mention a couple of them. We know that in 1881, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, he was assassinated. He was traveling in a bulletproof carriage in St. Petersburg Street. There was a bomb that kills innocent 21 bystanders. He comes out of the bulletproof carriage, another bomb comes, and he's killed. He was not killed by a Muslim. He was killed by Ignis. He was a Pole from Burbusk. He was a non-Muslim. He was an anarchist. We know in 1886, there was a bomb blast that took place in the Haymarket in Chicago during the labor rally. And 12 innocent people were killed. One amongst them was a policeman by the name of Dejan. Later on, 7 policemen were injured and they died in the hospital. The people responsible for this act, they were not Muslims. There were 8 anarchists, all of them non-Muslims. When we analyze the record of the terrorist attacks that have taken place in the 20th century, we know from the historical records that on the 6th of September, 1901, the then president of USA, William McKinley, he was assassinated by an anarchist by the name of Leon. He was shot twice by Leon. He was a non-Muslim. On the 1st of October, 1910, there was a bomb blast that took place in the Los Angeles Times newspaper building, in which 21 innocent people were killed. The people responsible for this bomb blast, they were 2 Christians by the name of James and Joseph. They were union leaders. They were non-Muslims. We know that on the 28th of June, 1914, in Sarajevo, France, the Archduke of Austria, along with his wife, they were assassinated, which precipitated the World War I. The people responsible for this assassination, they were called the Young Bosnia. Most of them, they were Serbs. They were not Muslims. From historical record, we come to know that on the 16th of April, 1925, there was a bomb blast that took place in St. Nedelia Church in Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, in which more than 150 innocent people were killed and more than 500 injured. It was the biggest terrorist attack that has taken place on the soil of Bulgaria. It was conducted by the Bulgarian Communist Party. They were not Muslims. We know from historical records that on the 9th of October, 1934, King Alexander I of Yugoslavia, he was assassinated by a gunman by the name of Lada Georgiev. He was a non-Muslim. The first US plane to be hijacked, it was not by a Muslim, it was by a non-Muslim by the name of Ortiz. He hijacked the US airliner to Cuba, and he later on got their asylum. When we go to the records of terrorist attacks done, we come to know that in the year 1968, the ambassador to Guatemala, he was assassinated by a non-Muslim. In 1969, the ambassador to Japan, he was knifed by a Japanese, a non-Muslim. The ambassador to Brazil in 1969, he was kidnapped by a non-Muslim. The famous attack, the Oklahoma bombing, which took place on 19th of April, 1995, where there was a truck loaded with a bomb which rammed into the federal building in Oklahoma, which killed 166 innocent human beings. And hundreds others were injured. Initially, it came in the press, Middle East conspiracy, for days together. Later on, they came to know it were 2 right-wing activists, Christians by the name of Timothy and Terry, who were responsible for the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma. But when this news comes, it comes for a couple of days and then it vanishes. But before, for several days, Middle East conspiracy, Middle East conspiracy. After World War II, from 1941 to 1948, in a span of 8 years, 259 terrorist attacks were conducted by Jewish terrorists. By many organizations, Ignun, Stern Gang, Haganah, and we know of the famous bombing of King David Hotel, which took place on the 22nd of July, 1946. They were conducted by Ignun under the leadership of Menachem Begin, in which 91 innocent people were killed, out of which 28 were British, 41 were Arabs, 17 Jews, and 5 others. The Ignun group, they dressed up as Arabs to show as though Muslims did the bombing. And the person responsible was Menachem Begin. And it was the biggest terrorist attack against the history of British Mandate, in which 91 people were killed. And at that time, Menachem Begin, he was called as terrorist number 1 by the British government. Later on, after a few years, he becomes the Prime Minister of Israel. And later on, after a few years, he gets the Nobel Prize for Peace. Imagine, a person who has killed hundreds and thousands of innocent human beings becomes the Prime Minister of Israel and later on gets the Nobel Prize for Peace. And most of the groups that were fighting, like Stern Gang, Ignun, Haganah, all of these Jewish groups and the leaders like Yitzhak Rabin, Menachem Begin, Ariel Sharon, later on became prime ministers and high-holding ranks in the state of Israel. And all of them, they were fighting for a Jewish state. If you see the world map, before 1945, Israel did not exist. Israel didn't exist. These Jewish groups, they were called as terrorists by the Britishers. They fought for a Jewish state. Later on, with power, they grabbed the land and they kicked the Palestinians out. And now these same people are calling the same Palestinians who are fighting for a more just cause, for getting the land back. And they are labeled today as terrorists by the Israelis. Imagine, Hitler incinerated 6 million Jews. He kicks the Jewish community out. Why should they come to Palestine? The Palestinians, they welcome the cousins with open hands. If they should take a land, they should go back to Germany. They should go back to Europe. Imagine the Palestinians, they welcome the cousins. Imagine, suppose a visitor comes to your house. Being a stranger, you welcome him in your house. After a few days, he kicks you out of the house. And when you cry at the doorstep, I want my house back, people call you a terrorist. This is exactly what has happened today. The Palestinians, they are called as terrorists for what? They only want their land back. And so-called people, most of these powerful first world countries, they are agreeing with this unjust cause. We know that in Germany, from historical records, from 1968 to 1992, the Bader-Meinhof gang, they killed several innocent human beings. In Italy, we come to know from records about the Red Brigades, which has killed several innocent human beings. They were also responsible for kidnapping the Prime Minister of Italy, Aldo Moro. And after 55 days, they killed him. Further, when we come, a similar gang, a similar terrorist outfit, we know, was also in Japan.